This is my story. I was a father who gave everything to his son. I worked, I sacrificed, I believed that one day he would honor me. But instead of love, I received words that cut me deeper than any wound. One night, my son looked at me and said, "You're nothing but a disgrace." I stood there, broken. Later, the bruises on my body told the rest of the story. But I didn't stay silent. I called 911 and showed them every mark. Before I share what happened next, tell me where you're watching from. And subscribe. I was born poor. My hands knew only work. My back bent under weight, and my feet carried me to every job I could find. I never thought about my comfort. My only thought was my son. He was the reason I woke before sunrise and came home long after dark. When he was small, I held him close and told myself that no hunger, no pain, and no struggle would ever touch him. I wanted him to have a life better than mine. I wanted him to have shoes that fit, food on the table, and books in his hands. I worked in factories where the air was heavy with dust. I carried loads until my shoulders ached. I took jobs that paid little, but I saved every coin I could. Each coin was not for me, it was for him. When I was thirsty, I drank water. When I was hungry, I gave the bread to him. There were days I ate nothing, so he could eat twice. There were nights I walked home because I had no money left for the bus. I told myself it was worth it. Every empty stomach, every tired step, every blistered hand, it was all worth it if my boy smiled. I believed that sacrifice was love. I believed love would be returned one day. I looked at him and thought, this child will grow strong. He will carry my name with pride. He will not have to struggle like me. That thought was enough to keep me alive. His schooling was my dream. I sold things from our home so he could buy books. I wore the same shirt for years while he wore new clothes. I did not want him to feel poor. I wanted him to stand tall among his friends. I wanted him to look in the mirror and see possibility, not limits. Every night when he slept, I looked at him and felt peace. My body hurt, but my heart felt warm. I whispered to myself, one day he will understand. One day he will thank me. Those words were my comfort when I lay down with an aching back. I taught him respect. I taught him honesty. I told him to never forget the soil he came from. I told him to bow his head to elders and to carry humility like a badge. I thought he was listening. I thought he was learning. I thought my sacrifices would shape him into a man with honor. But I never knew that the world outside would shape him faster than my words. I never knew that comfort could erase memory. I never knew that the food I placed on his plate, the roof I built over his head, and the sweat I poured into his future would one day mean nothing to him. Still, in those years, I held on to hope. I never looked at my suffering as wasted. I believed that one day, when he stood tall in the world, he would look back at me with gratitude. I pictured him placing his hand on my shoulder and saying, "Father, you gave me everything." That picture lived in my mind for decades. As my son grew older, small changes began to show. At first, they were easy to ignore. His voice became sharper, his answers shorter. Where once there was warmth, now there was a wall of coldness. I thought it was only youth. I thought maybe it was just the age of rebellion. I told myself he would soon grow out of it, just like clouds pass and the sun returns. But instead of passing, the clouds grew darker. He started to speak to me without care. The same boy who once held my hand now rolled his eyes when I gave him advice. He began to mock the way I spoke. He laughed at my old clothes, my tired shoes, and my broken hands. Every word from him was like a small cut on my heart. Still, I stayed silent, hoping that silence would heal what arrogance had built. I thought respect could return on its own. When I reminded him of the struggles we had faced, he turned away. He no longer wanted to hear about the days of hunger or the nights without sleep. To him, my sacrifices were old stories, unworthy of memory. He wanted only to talk about his money, his friends, his success. To him, my life was nothing but dirt under his feet. He forgot that his strong steps were built on my broken bones. As his earnings grew, his pride grew even faster. He dressed in expensive clothes, wore shiny watches, and drove cars I could never dream of owning. But with every step up he took, his respect for me stepped down. He began to see me not as a father, but as a burden. In his eyes, I was no longer the man who built his world. I was a shadow standing in the way of his light. Neighbors noticed the way he spoke to me. Friends who visited the house whispered about his tone. They saw the sharpness in his words, the anger in his face, and the way he dismissed me like an unwanted stranger. They gave me looks of pity, but I turned my face away. I did not want their pity. I wanted my son's respect. I wanted the love I had planted to grow into gratitude. But what grew instead was arrogance, wild and untamed. Every father expects some distance as his child grows. But what I received was not distance. It was disrespect. The small boy who once clung to me now pushed me away with words sharper than knives. His voice carried no honor, no gratitude, no softness. I sat in silence, night after night, telling myself that maybe time would change him. But as months passed, the disrespect only deepened, and the son I raised with love became the man who wounded me with words. That night was different from the others. The room was quiet, the air heavy, and the silence felt like it was waiting to break. I sat in my chair, tired from the day, while my son paced back and forth. His steps were fast, his face was red, and his hands moved as if he was ready for a fight. I knew another argument was about to rise, but I did not expect the storm that came next. It started with small complaints. He accused me of being old, of being useless, of standing in the way of his life. He said I had nothing left to offer, nothing worth listening to. His voice grew louder with every word. I tried to calm him, but my words fell into the fire of his anger. He no longer wanted to hear reason. He wanted to burn every bridge between us. And then, like a hammer striking glass, he shouted, "You're nothing but a disgrace." The words did not just fall into the air. They slammed into my chest. They tore through my heart. In that moment, I felt my breath leave me. I stood frozen, unable to move, unable to think. All I could do was hear those words again and again inside my head. For decades, I had worked with these hands. For years, I had bent my back to feed him, to clothe him, to keep him safe. I had skipped meals so he could eat, walked miles so he could ride, suffered so he could live better. And yet, in one sentence, he threw it all away. He erased my sacrifice with a single insult. He killed my pride with one careless strike of the tongue. Those words were heavier than stone. They were sharper than any knife I had ever seen. A slap to the face could bruise the skin, but his words bruised my soul. A punch could make my teeth shake, but his words made my spirit tremble. Pain filled my chest in a way that no wound could. It was the kind of pain that does not bleed on the outside, but bleeds forever inside. I wanted to speak, but no words came. My lips opened, but my voice stayed trapped. My heart raced, my mind spun, and my body felt weaker than ever. I stood like a tree struck by lightning, alive, but split down the middle. The man I had raised, the son I had loved more than myself, had looked me in the eyes and called me a disgrace. I remembered the nights when he was small, and I carried him on my shoulders. I remembered the times I held his hand as he learned to walk. I remembered the days I went without food so he could eat a full plate. Every memory returned to me, each one now covered in the shadow of his words. The love I gave him became a weight on my chest. The sacrifices I made turned into chains around my heart. I looked at him, standing there with pride in his eyes, and I saw no son. I saw only a man filled with arrogance, blind to the roots that carried him. He did not see the old man in front of him as a father. He saw me as a burden, a stain, a disgrace. That single word built a wall between us, higher than any mountain, thicker than any stone. My silence that night was not weakness. It was heartbreak. I could not answer him with anger, because anger would have been too easy for him to dismiss. I could not answer with violence, because violence would have proved his point. Instead, I stood in silence, carrying the weight of his insult. But deep inside, something was breaking. Something was changing. That night marked the end of patience and the birth of resolve. The house was the same, but it no longer felt like home. The son I raised no longer felt like family. His words echoed in every corner, every wall, every shadow. "You're nothing but a disgrace." I heard it when I closed my eyes. I heard it when I tried to sleep. I heard it in every beat of my heart. Those words did not fade. They grew louder with time. And as they grew, so did my decision. Because when a son can look into his father's eyes and say those words, he has already forgotten the meaning of respect. When a child can erase decades of love in a single sentence, he has already turned his back on family. And when a father has been pushed to the edge of heartbreak, only action can answer what words have destroyed. That night, I realized my silence would not last forever. Behind closed doors, the anger of my son became heavier than words. It no longer stayed in his tongue. It moved into his hands. He struck me when no one was there to see. He pushed me against walls. He made me stumble on the floor. His voice was loud, but his blows were louder. The bruises appeared across my skin like maps of shame, purple and black, marking every moment I had kept quiet. I wore long sleeves even in the heat, so neighbors would not ask questions. I told myself the pain was mine to carry. I told myself a father must stay patient, that maybe my silence would calm him. But silence never calmed him. Silence fed his rage. He began to see me not as a father, but as an easy target. He thought his strength gave him power. He thought my silence meant fear. Each night, I lay in bed feeling the ache of my bones, wondering how the boy I raised could treat me this way. The bruises grew, and my strength faded. I moved slower, sat longer, and stayed quiet even when I wanted to shout. My teeth hurt when I chewed, my ribs hurt when I breathed, and my spirit hurt when I remembered who caused it. Still, I tried to protect his image from the world. I smiled when others asked about him. I told lies to shield him. I carried both the wounds and the excuses, but they weighed heavier each day. One morning, I looked in the mirror and hardly recognized the man staring back. My face was swollen, my lips split, and my eyes carried shadows of sleepless nights. The bruises were not just on my body, they had spread into my soul. I felt small in my own house, like a guest in a place I had built. Every wall reminded me of sacrifices I made for him, and every wall now witnessed how little he respected them. But beneath the pain, something else began to grow. It was not fear anymore. It was not shame. It was anger that turned into quiet resolve. My body hurt, but my mind grew sharper. Each bruise became a reminder that I could no longer stay silent. Each mark on my skin whispered that I had to act before I disappeared completely into his violence. So I began to plan, not with noise, but with patience. I started keeping count of every wound. I began to write down the days and the hours. I kept track of every bruise, every cut, every insult. I turned my suffering into evidence. My silence was ending, and my bruises would no longer stay hidden. They would one day speak for me. That thought gave me strength, even when my body was weak. The truth sat heavy on my chest every night. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the echo of his insults, feeling the sting of his strikes, and I realized something no father ever wants to admit. My silence was helping him. By hiding the bruises, by swallowing the pain, I had allowed him to grow bolder. He thought there would never be a cost. He thought his hands could strike without consequence. But a quiet seed began to grow inside me, a seed of decision, a seed that whispered, "Enough." I understood that yelling would change nothing. Shouting back would only feed his anger, and hitting back would make me no different from him. Violence against violence would not fix the broken bond. What I needed was a lesson stronger than fists, a consequence that would not fade like bruises. Respect had to be taught in a way he could never ignore, in a way the world itself would remind him of. This was no longer about pain, it was about dignity. I began to think carefully about how to turn my pain into proof. I stood in front of the mirror and lifted my sleeves, looking at the black and blue marks across my arms. I touched the cuts that still burned and the swelling that had not healed. Each one told a story that could not be denied. So I picked up my old phone and I took pictures. My hands trembled, not from weakness, but from the weight of what I was doing. For the first time, I was preparing to defend myself. The days turned into weeks, and the bruises kept coming. Each time, I added to my record. Photos of my arms, photos of my back, notes written in simple words. He hit me again today. I kept everything hidden in a folder, tucked away where he would never see it. Every picture was a truth he could not erase. Every note was a reminder that I had endured enough. I was not building a case of anger. I was building a case of survival. There were nights when doubt crept into my mind. I thought about how the world might judge me. A father reporting his own son. A father exposing the child he had raised with love. But then I looked at my swollen face in the mirror and I reminded myself, this was not the boy I raised. This was a man who chose cruelty. This was a man who thought his father's body was a canvas for his rage. And if I stayed silent, he would never stop. If I stayed silent, one day silence might be my grave. So I promised myself that the next time the pain grew too heavy, the next time I looked at my bruises in the mirror, I would no longer cover them with sleeves. I would no longer protect the man who broke me. I would let the world see what he had done. I would gather my proof, hold my head high, and call for justice. I was not planning revenge. I was planning respect. And respect would be demanded, not begged for. The night came when the weight on my chest grew too heavy to carry. I sat in my chair, staring at the phone on the table, my hands shaking, not from weakness, but from the storm inside me. I had lived too long in silence, hiding pain under long sleeves, pretending everything was fine when it was not. That night, after another strike, after another insult, I pressed my palm against my bruised ribs and whispered to myself, "No more." My trembling fingers reached for the phone, and for the first time in years, I felt the power of choice return to me. The numbers were simple, 911. I had dialed them before in my younger days, when accidents or emergencies happened to neighbors or strangers, but never for myself, never to protect my own life. As the dial tone rang, I felt my throat tighten. My voice had been silenced for years, but now it had to rise, even if it shook. When the operator answered, I spoke softly. My words were not loud, but they carried weight. I said I was hurt. I said I was not safe. And I said the hardest thing a father can say, "My son is the one who hurt me." For a moment, I thought the line might go quiet, that maybe they would doubt me, that maybe they would dismiss an old man's claim. But the operator's voice was steady. They told me officers were on the way. They told me to stay calm, to stay safe, and that I was not alone anymore. As I listened, I realized something had shifted. For the first time in many years, I was not the helpless father covering bruises in silence. I was a man taking control of his life again. The wait for the officers felt endless. Every sound in the house made me flinch. Every step in the hallway made me wonder if he had realized what I had done. My son was in the other room, pacing, muttering, still consumed by anger, still thinking I was too broken to fight back. But he did not know the truth. He did not know that justice was already on its way. My heart raced, my body ached, but my spirit grew stronger with every passing second. I was not calling as a victim. I was calling as a man reclaiming his dignity. I thought about all the years I had sacrificed, the years of working with tired hands and an empty stomach just so he could eat. I thought about the hope I had carried, that one day he would see my sacrifices and stand tall with pride. And then I thought about his words, "You're nothing but a disgrace." That sentence had cut deeper than any bruise. But now, as I sat with the phone still in my hand, I knew the truth. A disgrace is not the man who suffers. A disgrace is the man who abuses. Tonight, that truth would no longer be hidden. The minutes stretched, but I stayed steady. My hands still trembled, but I no longer felt powerless. Each second brought the sound of sirens closer. Each second brought the moment when silence would break. I knew that once the officers arrived, there would be no turning back. My son would see that the father he had mocked, the father he had beaten, was not afraid anymore. Respect would return, not through love, not through begging, but through consequence. For the first time in years, I felt free. The night came when the weight on my chest grew too heavy to carry. I sat in my chair, staring at the phone on the table, my hands shaking not from weakness, but from the storm inside me. I had lived too long in silence, hiding pain under long sleeves, pretending everything was fine when it was not. That night, after another strike, after another insult, I pressed my palm against my bruised ribs and whispered to myself, "No more." My trembling fingers reached for the phone, and for the first time in years, I felt the power of choice return to me. The numbers were simple, 911. I had dialed them before in my younger days, when accidents or emergencies happened to neighbors or strangers, but never for myself, never to protect my own life. As the dial tone rang, I felt my throat tighten. My voice had been silenced for years, but now it had to rise, even if it shook. When the operator answered, I spoke softly. My words were not loud, but they carried weight. I said I was hurt. I said I was not safe. And I said the hardest thing a father can say. My son is the one who hurt me. For a moment, I thought the line might go quiet, that maybe they would doubt me, that maybe they would dismiss an old man's claim. But the operator's voice was steady. They told me officers were on the way. They told me to stay calm, to stay safe, and that I was not alone anymore. As I listened, I realized something had shifted. For the first time in many years, I was not the helpless father covering bruises in silence. I was a man taking control of his life again. The wait for the officers felt endless. Every sound in the house made me flinch. Every step in the hallway made me wonder if he had realized what I had done. My son was in the other room, pacing, muttering, still consumed by anger, still thinking I was too broken to fight back. But he did not know the truth. He did not know that justice was already on its way. My heart raced, my body ached, but my spirit grew stronger with every passing second. I was not calling as a victim. I was calling as a man reclaiming his dignity. I thought about all the years I had sacrificed, the years of working with tired hands and an empty stomach just so he could eat. I thought about the hope I had carried, that one day he would see my sacrifices and stand tall with pride. And then I thought about his words. "You're nothing but a disgrace." That sentence had cut deeper than any bruise. But now, as I sat with the phone still in my hand, I knew the truth. A disgrace is not the man who suffers. A disgrace is the man who abuses. Tonight, that truth would no longer be hidden. The minutes stretched, but I stayed steady. My hands still trembled, but I no longer felt powerless. Each second brought the sound of sirens closer. Each second brought the moment when silence would break. I knew that once the officers arrived, there would be no turning back. My son would see that the father he had mocked, the father he had beaten, was not afraid anymore. Respect would return, not through love, not through begging, but through consequence. For the first time in years, I felt free. The silence in the room broke when the officers turned toward my son. Their eyes were sharp, their voices calm but firm. They told him he was under arrest for abuse. The words cut through the air like iron, and for the first time in his life, he had no power to answer back. His mouth opened to protest, but the officers were already stepping forward. They pulled his arms behind his back, and the sound of cold steel clicking shut filled the room. The handcuffs locked around his wrists, not just as metal, but as judgment. His arrogance had no shield now. My son twisted, shouting, insisting it was all a mistake. He called me a liar. He called the police blind. He called the bruises fake. But the louder he shouted, the more he exposed himself. His anger only proved the truth of who he had become. The officers did not argue. They did not explain. They held him steady, their grip strong, their faces unmoved by his cries. In that moment, the roles had changed. The man who once raised his hand against me now stood powerless before strangers who saw the truth with clear eyes. The sound of commotion spread beyond the walls of my house. Neighbors stepped outside, curious faces peeking from behind curtains and doors. Some whispered, others gasped as they saw the flashing lights and the man in handcuffs. My son, who once walked through this street with pride in his step and arrogance in his eyes, now stood exposed under the judgment of the entire neighborhood. His head turned side to side, searching for escape, but there was none. The weight of shame fell heavy on his shoulders, heavier than the cuffs that bound his wrists. I stood still in the corner of the room, my shirt still loose in my hand, my bruises still visible on my skin. For years, I had carried the shame in silence, hiding the truth from the world. But now, the shame no longer belonged to me. It belonged to him. Each neighbor watching from their doorway, each whisper carried in the night air, was another piece of his mask torn away. The man who once called me a disgrace now stood disgraced before everyone. The officers guided him out the door, his voice still loud but hollow. He shouted promises of revenge, he cursed the night, he swore he would return. But the words bounced off the walls, empty and powerless. The handcuffs clinked with every step he took, and with each sound, I felt a piece of my spirit heal. I did not need to raise my hand against him. I did not need to shout. The truth itself had become the weapon, and justice itself had become the answer. As he was pushed into the back of the police car, his body twisting with rage, I stepped closer to the door and looked out. The flashing lights painted his face in red and blue, colors of justice and consequence. His eyes searched for me, burning with anger, but I did not flinch. I met his gaze, silent, steady, unbroken. In that one moment, he saw it clearly. The father he thought was weak was stronger than he ever imagined. The man he thought was powerless had just taken everything from him with nothing more than the truth. I did not wave. I did not smile. I simply stood there, my body marked with the evidence of years, my spirit carrying the weight of justice. The officers closed the door, and the car drove away, carrying my son into the night, carrying his arrogance into silence. The neighbors slowly stepped back into their homes, whispers fading into the dark. The street grew quiet once again, but inside my chest, a storm of release swirled. I was no longer a prisoner of silence. I was a witness of justice. The night after his arrest, my house was quiet for the first time in years. No shouting, no footsteps pacing with anger, no doors slamming in rage. Only silence, deep and heavy. But this time, the silence felt different. It was not the silence of fear, but the silence of peace. I sat in my chair, my body aching, my bruises still dark, but my heart carried a weight that was finally lifting. For years I had been a prisoner of my own home, walking on eggshells, hiding the truth beneath long sleeves. Now the truth was out in the open, and the world could no longer ignore it. The police filed their charges, each word typed into their report, carving his cruelty into the record forever. The law had seen the bruises, the neighbors had witnessed the arrest, and now there was no place for him to hide. The protection order they gave me was more than paper, it was freedom. For the first time in years, I could walk into my own kitchen without fear of what voice might shout behind me. I could sit by my window and breathe without the weight of dread pressing down on my chest. My home was my own again, reclaimed not by force, but by truth. News travels quickly, faster than one expects. Within days, whispers spread beyond the street and into the circles my son had built for himself. Friends who once admired his charm now learned of his cruelty. Colleagues who once respected his confidence now heard of his violence. Bit by bit, the image he had created for himself cracked and crumbled. He had painted himself as a man of strength and success, but the truth revealed the weakness he tried to hide. No one could look at him the same way. The pride he carried in public was burned away by the truth that followed him everywhere. I watched from a distance, not with joy, but with calm. This was not a victory born of happiness. It was a victory born of survival. For years, I carried pain in silence, thinking it was my burden alone. But silence had given him power, and speaking had taken it away. I had not only freed myself, I had revealed the truth to the world. Every bruise had spoken louder than his shouts. Every mark on my skin had become evidence that even arrogance cannot erase. His downfall was not my revenge. It was the natural end of his own actions. The house felt lighter as days passed. I no longer needed to hide in shadows or cover myself with shame. I walked to the market without fear of people asking questions I could not answer. I spoke to neighbors with a voice that was steady, no longer trembling. Their eyes no longer looked at me with pity, but with respect. They had seen the truth with their own eyes, and now they knew I was not the weak man my son had painted me to be. I was strong, not because of fists, but because I endured, and I chose to rise. For my son, life grew smaller. Job offers stopped. Friends vanished. Neighbors who once greeted him with smiles now turned away when he passed. His arrogance had built walls, but truth broke them down. The man who once told me I was a disgrace now walked with his head lowered, carrying the weight of his own disgrace for the world to see. He had mocked me for being powerless, but now he was the one who had lost power over everything: his job, his friends, his freedom, his pride. What he had taken from me, the world had taken from him tenfold. At night, I would sit by my window, looking out at the same street where he had once shouted and cursed. Now that street was calm, lined with homes full of quiet whispers and soft lights. My bruises healed slowly, but the deeper wound in my heart began to close. It did not close with forgiveness, but with acceptance. I had given him everything: my labor, my years, my sacrifices, and in return, he had given me pain. Yet, in the end, it was that same pain that gave me strength to rise and expose the truth. The cycle had ended, not with silence, but with courage. I no longer dreamed of hearing an apology, because I understood something greater. An apology could not erase the nights I spent in fear. An apology could not erase the years I wasted waiting for change. But justice had erased his mask. Justice had restored my dignity. That was enough. I had not sought revenge with anger or violence. I had sought it with truth, and truth had answered louder than I ever could. The disgrace he tried to put on me now rested on his own shoulders, heavy and permanent. As the weeks turned to months, I carried myself differently. My back straightened, my steps steadied, my spirit breathed freer. I had endured storms of anger and rivers of pain, but now I walked on ground that was solid again. My home was no longer a prison. My life was no longer trapped in silence. And though the bruises faded, the lesson remained clear as day. Silence protects the abuser, but truth destroys him. My son tried to bury me in shame, but I had buried his arrogance with nothing more than the strength to speak. Now, as an old man, I tell this story not with bitterness, but with clarity. Time has given me distance, and distance has given me perspective. My body has healed from the bruises, though some marks remain faint beneath the skin. My heart has also healed, though it carries scars no one can see. These scars remind me of both the pain and the strength it took to survive. I used to think silence was dignity, that enduring abuse without complaint was the mark of strength. I was wrong. Silence is not dignity. Silence is surrender. Speaking up, showing the truth, and demanding justice, that is dignity. When I look back, I do not only see my son's cruelty, I also see my own endurance. I see the long nights when I worked so he could eat. I see the mornings when I walked miles so he could study. I see the sacrifices I made, each one carved into my body like invisible lines. I gave everything, and though he repaid me with pain, I do not regret what I gave. A father's devotion is not measured by what he receives in return, but by what he gives without question. Even in betrayal, I know my love was real. He chose disrespect, but I chose love. The lesson I carry is simple. Love can be patient, but respect must be earned. No man, no matter his age, should suffer abuse in silence. Respect is not optional, not a gift to be begged for. It is the foundation of family, and without it, family collapses. My son tried to strip me of respect, but he failed. In trying to destroy me, he destroyed himself. The world saw the truth when I revealed it. The truth became my shield, stronger than any wall of silence I had built before. People sometimes ask me if I regret calling 911, if I regret showing my bruises and exposing my own child. My answer is always the same. I regret waiting so long. I regret thinking my silence would change him. I regret letting my fear keep me quiet for years while my body suffered. But I do not regret the day I chose to speak. That day, I did not just save myself. I saved my dignity, and I saved the truth. The truth will outlive me, and it will follow him forever. When I sit with other elders, I tell them my story. Many of them have their own wounds, hidden behind smiles and silence. I tell them not to hide. I tell them that bruises heal, but silence grows heavier with each passing day. I tell them that respect is not something you beg for, it is something you demand by showing the truth. Some of them cry when they hear my story, and I see in their eyes the strength they forgot they had. If my pain can give them courage, then my story has served a greater purpose. I live now in calm. The shadows of the past still pass through my memory, but they do not chain me. I eat my meals in peace. I sleep without fear of footsteps outside my door. My son called me a disgrace, but in the end, the world saw who the real disgrace was. He tried to bury my dignity under his cruelty, but the truth rose higher than his arrogance. My life today is quiet, not because I am weak, but because I finally claimed my strength. The final thought I carry is this: he called me a disgrace, but his words did not define me. My scars did not define me. My silence did not define me. What defined me was the day I chose to break that silence, the day I chose to show the truth, the day I chose dignity over fear. He broke my skin, but he could not break my spirit. He broke my peace, but he could not break my resolve. In the end, it was not his hands that shaped my future. It was my choice to rise. He said I was nothing, but I proved that I was something greater than his anger. I was a father who endured, a man who stood, and a human who chose dignity. And that is what I leave behind. Not the bruises, not the pain, not the betrayal, but the truth.